So in Act 4, Scene 2, it also starts in media res, and it starts with Othello in the middle of interrogating Emilia about Cassio and Desdemona. So Othello here is actually allowing Emilia into that knowledge, presumably assuming that she already knows about it anyway, so he doesn't feel like he's given up any of his manhood by letting her know that he's been cheated on. It's interesting, though, that he does actually go to Emilia. That is one element of him being cautious and wanting to hear it directly from a closer source to Desdemona. But then, of course, he completely dismisses her. So he concludes that it's strange that Emilia has never seen them together, never seen anything bad happen, which, of course, doesn't suggest that he really believes Emilia. Even when Emilia says that she'd lay down my soul at stake, so she'd give up, she's put her life on the line, her soul on the line, to say that it's not the case. And she also suspects here that a wretch has put this idea into Othello's head. And of course, yes, a wretch has done that, her own husband. And she says, if that's the case, that's terrible. And Emilia, again, shows us insight. She is so knowledgeable about the impact of jealousy because she's gone through it herself that she really sees it straight away. And at the end of this speech, Emilia says, if she's not honest and chaste, so, hasn't cheated, and is true, then there's no man happy. In other words, Desdemona is the most loyal person alive. So, unfortunately, Othello continues to put his trust in the wrong people, and we can perhaps explore his upbringing as a potential cause for this, or, of course, Iago's masterful manipulation skills, but even his own wife, even Emilia's own wife, does not suspect the extent of his evil, as we see later on in this scene. So Othello dismisses Emilia here. She goes off to get Desdemona, and he calls her a simple bawd and a subtle whore. And he shares that he has seen Emilia be deceptive in the past. I've seen her do it. That perhaps add more weight to the idea that he has slept with her. For Othello to dismiss her so readily, maybe he has slept with Emilia, and Emilia has obviously gone and lied to Iago about it, and therefore he doesn't trust her, and he doesn't trust that he would tell her about Desdemona. She would tell him about Desdemona cheating. That's, of course, speculation, but I don't think it's too much of a reach to suggest, if Othello has absolutely seen Emilia lie and be deceptive, perhaps it was because of that. So Desdemona arrives. Oh, apologies. And is still respectful to Othello. And remember, he's just hit her in the face in public. And she's still calling him my lord, no matter what. She's very loyal here. And you could argue that she's lacking in self-respect at this point, that she's not changed her treatment of him despite what he's done to her. And again, this just generates more sympathy. Pretty much everything Desdemona does between now and her death is Shakespeare manipulatively making us feel as sympathetic for her as possible. He really confuses Desdemona because of the way he's speaking to her. Now, Emilia leaves here. And, Desdemona says, upon my knees, what does your speech import? I understand a fury in your words, so I can see that you're angry, but I don't understand why. I don't understand what you're saying. And Othello says to her, what are you? As if she's an animal or a creature. So on page 165, Othello says to his wife that she should damn herself by swearing that she's a loyal wife. Now, he's convinced that she is going to go to hell because of what she's done. And this is a really poor exchange. This is the closest Othello gets to speaking to Desdemona about what happened. And he doesn't really give her a chance to explain or defend herself. He speaks in riddles to her. He uses contractions. He cries. He wants her gone. It is actually a really tragic moment. Othello says, heaven knows you are truly as false as hell. Okay, and then you've got the antithesis of heaven and hell. And Desdemona just wants, to who? Who have I been false with? Who have I been false to? Because she doesn't think it's to Othello. With who? Who has she slept with? What's she done? She has no idea. So that repetitive interrogatives show how confused she is. And rather than telling her, rather than getting to the point of it, Othello can't bring himself to say it, and he just says, oh, Desdemona, go away, away, away. Just go away from me, because he can't believe that she wouldn't know. He can't believe that innocence. And then we learn from Desdemona, and this happens quite a lot in this act and in Act 3 as well, that we learn how bad Othello's physically affected by other people's responses to him. So why do you weep? We learn from Desdemona that he's now crying. She guesses that perhaps he's upset because he suspects that Brabantio is the reason why he's been called back to Venice. And she says, if that's the case, please don't blame me. Bless her, that's what she thinks is the case, not that it's anything to do with her. So even though Desdemona is here for this speech, it feels like it's a soliloquy. You can see that, Desdemona doesn't really have any interaction with him here. And he very much seems to be talking to himself. So we'll just look at the key lines from this speech here. So firstly, he wishes that heaven had made him poor instead of making him a fixed figure for the time of scorn. So he would rather be completely steeped in poverty than be cheated on, because then people can scorn him and laugh at him and ridicule him, and that's what he thinks he is now. So he's very preoccupied about himself and how he feels and how he sees himself now. This bit at the bottom here is a really in-depth metaphor for Desdemona being a fountain. Okay, it's quite tricky to follow because his thoughts are so disjointed. But essentially, he is firstly saying here that he feels like he will have he's now talking about the fact that he will bear no life, so he won't be able to have children. So the fountain, Desdemona, has dried up. So from the fountain from which my current runs, Desdemona, has dried up, and therefore he will not bear any life. Now, it kind of suggests really that he really does want children, and that was probably one of the things that he was really excited about, getting married. Presumably many times in his life, Othello would think he wouldn't be able to have children because he wouldn't have stability, or he wouldn't, just even be able to get married. So it's just like a really tragic sense here of what he feels he has lost. And of course, what makes it more, the biggest dramatic irony is, of course, that as an audience, we know he hasn't lost that yet, but his actions are going to cost him that possibility. And of course, to him, he would also think that if Desdemona were to get pregnant, he would have no assuredness that he was the father. And that is one of the reasons why women cheating was such a terrible thing, because of course they didn't have DNA tests in those days, and they wouldn't, a man would never know for sure if a child was his if his wife had cheated. So there is a kind of biological economic background to it, because of course a child would inherit the father's wealth, and he might not have any proof that it's actually his own child. So that's kind of, maybe adds more, it helps us to understand a little bit more this extreme reaction to being cheated on, perhaps. Also, of course, she's discarded him in her eyes, and she's polluted herself. So the fountain is now a system for foul toads. So, she's ruined herself. She's ruined their marriage, and she's discarded Othello, which is a really sad idea, the fact that he feels discarded, like he's been left alone, and she's wanted somebody else. So it really emphasizes to me, I think, this bit, the extent to which Othello probably couldn't believe his fortune. He couldn't believe how lucky he was to marry so well, to have the opportunity for a family. And it is, of course, all the more likely that he'd worry about losing it all, and more easily believe that Desdemona would stray from him when he kind of thinks, I was too lucky anyway. It was, that feeling of it was too good to be true, that perhaps is added to his belief of Iago's lies. Towards the end of the page, he calls her a weed. Oh, thou weed. Which sounds like a nice compliment. Oh, thou weed. But really isn't. He suggests that she's disguised as a flower. She's lovely fur and smells so sweet. So there's a little bit of contrasting language again there. And he says that he wished that she'd never been born. Lovely. Very cruel, because he's saying this to her face, remember, and all she says in the middle of all that is, I hope that you esteem me honest. Desdemona, alas, what ignorant sin have I committed? She still doesn't know. So a little bit here. I mean, she's very calm and she's very collected, as Othello once was, and she just asks what she's done. I mean, you know, she's obviously affected and very confused and scared maybe, but she's very calm. Think about many of us, if we were accused of all the things Othello's accusing her of, would completely hit the roof and be really angry and shout and say, I've done no such thing. How dare you? Where's all this coming from? How dare you not trust me? But so really, I think element here that we have to respect Desdemona's calm and collected nature. She's also very ignorant, really. She doesn't have any idea what's going on, but she also doesn't really correct him either. You know, she says, I hope you find me honest, and what sin have I committed? But she doesn't really defend herself any more than that. Okay, so on page 167, Othello calls his wife a public commoner, which is a whore, and an imprudent strumpet, again, another way of calling her a whore. And he claims that he can't speak of her crimes because it would make her ashamed. So this is this bit here. I should make the very forges of my cheek that I would to cinders burn up modesty, but I do speak thy deeds, what committed. So, in other words, he thinks that if he was to say her crimes aloud, it would make her ashamed. So firstly, this assumes that she's ashamed of her actions, which of course she would be if she had done that, but she hasn't. And he really judges her. You know, he really sees that those actions as being shameful, which of course in that society it was. But secondly, it means, of course, that he isn't really giving Desdemona a chance to convince him otherwise. She knows no details. All she knows is that he believes that she's a whore. She has no idea what she's done. So how can she really defend herself? And this is definitely one of Othello's last mistakes, because he's intent on killing her after already, and he doesn't really give her a chance to change his mind. So further down the page, Desdemona does start to defend herself, and she says that she's a Christian, and that's her first line of defense, that she is a Christian and therefore would never cheat. And she says, I preserve this vessel for you, my lord, the vessel being her body. Okay, I am not a whore. So they're the three things she used to defend herself. And Othello says, what, not a whore? And Desdemona says, no, so I will be saved I will go to heaven. I've not done anything wrong. And Othello just asks if it's possible. Desdemona just is lovely to include Othello here. It's not, oh, heaven forgive you, because he's the one who's making mistakes. She includes herself. So again, Shakespeare's creating as much sympathy for Desdemona as he can before she dies. None of these denials appear to touch Othello at all. He speaks to her in a really derisive tone. He's full of sarcasm. Oh, I cry you mercy then. I took you for that cunning whore of Venice that married with Othello. That's who I thought you were. Yeah. He speaks of himself in third person, possibly because his jealousy is forcing him to see himself as he believes society is. So to him, an outsider now would look at Desdemona and see a cunning whore of Venice that married that guy Othello. And then he's completely broken. Look, you. He's repeating words there. He's just trying to get her to see it, but he doesn't actually give her a chance to show him who she really is. He insists that she won't enter heaven. He's a really, really broken man. So we could ask ourselves here, because this is it. That's the end of their interaction. Of the last time they're alone on stage before he kills her in the last scene. If Desdemona had been less genteel here, could she maybe have broken through? But then is it fair to put that on her shoulders? Absolutely not. Othello absolutely should have given her a better chance. But if you got an essay on Desdemona, you would be amiss if you maybe didn't explore the negative sides of her genteel behaviour, especially given that, the wider theme of the play is how easily villainy can overpower good-natured people. So Emilia enters and Othello leaves, and Desdemona describes herself as being half asleep at the bottom here. She's very, very shocked and dazed. That's what I feel half asleep connotes. It obviously feels very real to her, and it certainly must feel very, very sudden, this change in her husband. So if we turn over, she requests that Desdemona lay her wedding sheets on their bed. So many would do that. You know, if you're having a difficult time in your marriage, you might say, oh, well, let's return to when we were happier and remind ourselves of that. So she's chosen to do that with the wedding sheets. Amelia runs off here and comes back with Iago here. So Amelia has chosen to go and get a husband, presumably thinking that it would help. Of course he doesn't. So Desdemona defends Othello here. You know, it's right that I should be used, so it's right. You know, I've obviously behaved in a negative way. And it really suggests, you know, she questions whether she herself is a whore. And that's such childlike, innocent behaviour that we feel even more pity for her. So, of course, in comes Iago. And then Amelia here emphasises that actually Desdemona has given up an awful lot to be with Othello, and that's this speech here. You know, she forsook so many noble matches. She gave up plenty of men who were really good. Her father, she gave up a father, she gave up a country, she gave up her friends, all that to be called a whore. Why wouldn't she cry? And then that. So through Amelia's words, we really Shakespeare really emphasizes the tragedy of Desdemona's decision here, and why it's even more tragic that she's been treated this way, why she absolutely does not deserve this from her husband. And once again, Amelia finishes the page full of insight, again saying, I'll be hanged if some eternal villain, some busy and insinuating rogue has not created this. And she says, I'll be hanged else. You know, I put my life on the fact that somebody has manipulated her into thinking this. Again, implicating what she herself has gone through, which is even more evidence later on in this act. But of course, it very much foreshadows the ending, because she's actually hanged, not literally, because she dies in a different way, but she does die because of what her husband has done. So an interesting foreshadowing there from Shakespeare. Okay. If we turn over then to page 171, Iago delightfully says, no, there's no such man. It's impossible. No, of course there's not a villain capable of that. Actually really excited and delightfully dismissing that possibility. And Desdemona, in her flat character wisdom, this is where I think she gets to be very, very, very a flat character, because who she almost is unbelievably good at this point. She is angelic, and we could say that she is a complete antithesis to Iago's character, where Iago is naturally cruel and awful. Desdemona is naturally just beautifully lovely, and says here, you know, well, if there is a man, let heaven pardon him, let heaven forgive him. Yes. Okay, so Amelia asks the questions now that Othello should have asked and never did. So where could Desdemona have cheated? When and how? What is the likelihood of this happening? Like, Desdemona is never on her own. She's an upstanding woman. She wouldn't ever really be, have the time or the inclination to do this. Othello never thinks about that. He never asks when that's possible. I remember that until a few days, literally a day after Othello sacks Cassio that Iago starts manipulating Othello. So presumably before he sacks Cassio, he's either with Cassio at work. I know a war zone isn't a traditional workplace, but he's either with Cassio in the course of his work, or he's with his wife. So literally, when would it have been possible? And Amelia is right to ask those questions. Othello does not ask them. So later on here, this is one of the best quotations, because it feeds into so much about Iago, and this is a great one that you could have used in your Iago essays if you'd have known about it at the time. So here we learn that there was a man, a squire, who turned Iago's wit, the seamy side is out, and made you suspect me with the more. So what we learn here is that there was another man, a squire, who convinced Iago to suspect Amelia had slept with Othello. So this is confirmation of what Iago said in Act 2, where he said, it is thought abroad that she has betwixt my sheets and my office with Othello. And there's a sense here, though, there's a massive cycle because there was a man who told Iago that his wife had cheated on him. So really what we learn here is that Iago has very tragically, he wants to play the role of the squire now. He wants to play the role of the man telling somebody else that his wife has cheated because that is what somebody did to him. Now, this still doesn't tell us or give us any insight whether it was true or not, that Emilia did sleep with Othello or not. There's more evidence of that coming later. But it's a real sense of this cycle, this idea that men infect each other with these horrific ideas and incept into each other's brains these ideas that drive them mad with jealousy. And again, this idea of one cruel deed leads to another cruel deed, and that once something evil exists in the world, it will breed and it will fester and it will reproduce itself and it will spread like a plague around all these men in society. And all the time it's the women who are the victims, it's the women who suffer. Of course, in this case, Othello suffers as well. So the good people who suffer. Now, Iago does not entertain that idea, and he's probably quite annoyed that she said it in front of Desdemona, and she just says, essentially, shut up, go away. Now, Desdemona doesn't respond to that, or even, so we don't get a hint from Desdemona about whether she thinks that Othello has slept with Emilia. She doesn't seem to react at all. She's preoccupied and she's thinking about, how can I win my lord again? She's still being respectful to him. She just wants him back. She says that she loves him dearly later on. That she'll love him always. His unkindness may defeat my life, but never take my love. Now, his kindness literally defeats her life. He literally kills her out of his unkindness. But she's saying that she'll love him no matter what. And she's so innocent that she can't say whore. Like, she can't believe that that's what he thinks about her. So, Iago sort of doesn't really help Desdemona at all. He just says, oh, don't worry about it. It's probably the business of the state that's upset him. It's nothing to do with you. Which, of course, he's already made it clear that he is. And you could argue that this is Iago's cruelest moment. This woman is devoted to Othello, is desperate for help, wants to be kind to her husband again, no matter what, even though she hasn't done anything wrong in the first place, which he knows, and he basically suggests that she shouldn't bother trying to defend herself or win him back or change his mind, which of course, is part of his plan, isn't it? Because he doesn't want her to do that. But to do that to the face, it's different to do things behind people's back, but to really, mistreat them to the face is a much crueler thing to do. So this scene ends with, I forgot about this line. Great. Iago, all things shall be well. You'll be dead in the next act, but all things shall be well. Complete lie. And just horrible that he does that. So we have not seen Roderigo since Act 2. So we've not seen him at all in Act 3, and we're now nearly at the end of Act 4, and he finally makes a reappearance because, of course, Iago hasn't needed him until now. Now, it's Roderigo who approaches Iago this time, and actually, finally, Roderigo has developed something of a bit of wit and a little bit of insight, and is finally realising that he's being taken advantage of. So, we have a bit of character development for Roderigo, more so than Desdemona, actually. Roderigo is less of a flat character than Desdemona is. He's more rounded. He actually develops in some way. So, he says here, I will indeed no longer endure it. So there's a sense of haughtiness in his tone, the way he speaks, but he's standing up for himself finally. He says, your words and your performances are no kin, so your words and your actions don't match up. You're not doing what you said you were going to do, because of course he thought that he was going to help him to win Desdemona. He says, I have wasted myself out of my means. He's got no money left, just really tragic. And also you think, how foolish, Roderigo. Now, and he basically says, I'm done with you. And Iago at first just says, okay, then, well, fine, go to. See you then. And that infuriates Roderigo. In this relationship at this point reminds me of Bianca and Cassio's. It's very similar, and Shakespeare does a really good job of placing them, next to each other in terms of Rodrigo is Bianca and Iago is Cassio here. Iago has all the power because Rodrigo is desperately reliant and dependent on Iago. And here, Rodrigo wants an explanation for the way he's been treated and for what's gone on. And this foreshadows the idea that this is what Othello will want in Act 5 as well, when he realizes what's happened and Iago refuses to give it to him. So he's very confused. He says, I find myself fopped in it. You have fooled me. And he's very angry, and he wants him to explain himself, and he wants him to care. Whereas Iago is... The cruelest thing you can do to someone who's angry with you is just dismiss them and act like you're not even bothered. And that's what Iago's doing here. It's just like, well, whatever. Just very well. Look at his responses. Very well, very well. He's not interested. And then Rodrigo has to say, it is not very well. It's the equivalent of when someone just says, well, fine. It's not fine. Don't tell me it's fine. I'm angry. You have to deal with me. So he says, I will make myself known to Desdemona. Now, this is where Iago has to change his responses, because if Rodrigo goes and tells Desdemona everything that's happened, then of course that might be a problem for Iago. He says, I will repent my unlawful solicitation. I will apologize for the unlawful times I have chased her. Not great actions, but at least he will repent for them now. And if not, assure yourself I will seek satisfaction of you. And if not, I will come back and I will duel with you, which was a very traditional thing to do in those days to maintain your honor. Just challenge people to a duel, not a duel. That's something very different. Okay, so Iago then says, oh, actually, I've got a better opinion of you now than ever before. So actually, he praises Rodrigo for his own strength and for sticking up for himself and for defending himself. And Iago's actually quite impressed with him because, of course, he's earlier on in Act 2, he ridicules him for being so weak and so easily manipulated. And Iago then says, actually, your suspicion is not without wit and judgment. You know what? You're actually kind of right. I have been taking advantage of you. So he praises Rodrigo's insight. Again, because he knows that will manipulate Rodrigo. Rodrigo wants praise. He wants Iago's respect. So he's giving it to him at the very moment that he knows that he needs it. So he denies, however, what's happening and says that, you have no reason to doubt me, especially now than ever. Now, what he says here is, if by tomorrow night you are not enjoying Desdemona, then you can kill me. Take me from the world of treachery and devise engines for my life. But he knows that by tomorrow night, Desdemona is likely to be dead. So he's completely manipulating and lying to Rodrigo here. He knows, even as he's trying to convince him that he hasn't been lying to him and manipulating him and fooling him, he knows that Rodrigo's never going to get the woman that he wants because she's going to be dead by the end of the evening. So Iago then outright lies and again, he lies in a way that's close to the truth. And he says, Rodrigo thinks that Cassio, Othello and Desdemona are going to go back to Venice. And Iago says, oh, no. He goes, is it Mauritiana instead? And he takes him away. He takes with him Desdemona. Now, that's a complete lie because he is going back to Venice. Now, Cassio then says the only way that Othello's not going to leave and take Desdemona with her, which would take her away from Rodrigo, is if he had to stay here, linger here because of an accident. And the only way that would happen is if we removed Cassio. So if we were to get rid of Cassio, that would mean that Othello would have to stay here because he would be incapable of taking Othello's place. And when Rodrigo asks, how do you mean removing of him? We need to remove Cassio. What do you mean? Knock out his brains. So at this point, Iago is telling Cassio, the last thing that we need to do for you to win Desdemona is to kill Cassio. Rodrigo can't believe at first that that's what you have me do, or at least I interpret that as being quite shocked. And Iago essentially says, yes, if you would do yourself a profit and it's within your right to do it as well. He says he sups tonight with a harlotry, so that's Bianca. Remember, he told him, didn't he, in Act 4, Scene 1, where he was going to have his supper. He doesn't know yet what's happened. Cassio doesn't know that he's been promoted and is going to be staying in Othello's place. You may take him at your pleasure, you may kill him at your pleasure, and I will be near to you to second your attempt. Which, of course, he actually kills Rodrigo in the end. He says, come, stand not amazed. So we know from Iago's speech there that Rodrigo, as an actor on the character and the actor playing him on stage, would be very shocked at this point. He's obviously can't believe what he's hearing, which is not surprising because this is very, very different to what Iago's asked him to do in the past. And he says, but go along with me. I will show you why this is necessary, and you shall think yourself bound to put it on him. And this is essentially a persuasion that happens off stage. So he leaves. This is the end of the scene. We don't ever know what Iago says to convince Rodrigo that this is an essential act. But of course, we know from Act 5, Scene 1 that he does think it's an essential act, and he does try to kill Cassio. It's worth highlighting here how quickly you've got 2 pages where Rodrigo comes in, furious with Iago, saying he's going to leave, he's going back to Venice, he's had enough, he's got no money left, and within those lines, he's actually convinced him not only to trust Iago, think he's got a chance with Desdemona again, actually kill a man. It's quite amazing. And when he says you shall be satisfied, the audience groan inside, knowing actually, yes, of course, he's definitely going to convince poor Rodrigo, who's very easily manipulated anyway. Okay, and that ends Act 4, Scene 2.